So this is chapter 5, part 2, guys, and we're going to start right down here after Ralph looks at Jack open-mouthed after Jack just insults all the little ones. The thing is, fear can't hurt you any more than a dream. There aren't any beasts to be afraid of on this island. He looked along the row of whispering little ones. Serve you right if something did get you, you useless lot of crybabies. But there is no animal. Ralph interrupted him testily. What is all this? Who said anything about an animal? You did the other day. You said they dream and cry out. Now they talk. Not only the little ones, but my hunters sometimes talk of a thing, a dark thing, a beast, some sort of animal, I've heard. You thought not, didn't you? Now listen, you don't get big animals on small islands, only pigs. You only get lions and tigers in big countries like Africa and India. And the zoo, I've got the conch. I'm not only talking about the fear, I'm talking about the beast. Be frightened if you like, but as for the beast, Jack paused, cradling the conch, and turned to his hunters with their dirty black caps. Am I a hunter or am I not? They nodded simply. He was a hunter, all right. No one doubted that. Well then, I've been all over this island, by myself. If there were a beast, I'd have seen it. Be frightened because you're like that, but there's no beast in the forest. Jack handed back the conch and sat down. The whole assembly applauded him with relief. Then Peggy held out his hand. I don't agree with all Jack said, but with some. Of course there isn't a beast in the forest. How could there be? What would a beast eat? Pig. We eat pig. Piggy. I got the conch, said Peggy indignantly. Ralph, they ought to shut up, oughtn't they? You shut up, you little uns. What I mean is that I don't agree about this here fear. Of course there isn't nothing to be afraid of in the forest. Why, I've been there myself. You'll be talking about ghosts and such things next. We know what goes on, and if there's something wrong, there's someone to put it right. He took off his glasses and blinked at them. The sun had gone as if the light had been turned off. He proceeded to explain. If you get a pain in your stomach, whether it's a little one or a big one, yours is a big one. When you're done laughing, perhaps we can get on with the meeting. And if them little uns climb back on that twister again, they'll only fall off in a sec. So they might as well sit on the ground and listen. No, you have doctors for everything, even the inside of your mind. You really don't mean that we got to be frightened all the time of nothing. Life, said Peggy expansively, is scientific. That's what it is. In a year or two, when the war's over, they'll be traveling to Mars and back. I know there isn't no beast, not with claws and all that I mean, but I know there isn't no fear either. Peggy paused. Unless, Ralph moved restlessly. Unless what? Unless we get frightened of people. A sound, half laugh, half jeer, rose among the seated boys. Peggy ducked his head and went on hastily. Oh boy, that's the point, right? Like, there's nothing to be afraid of as far as like animals, ghosts, etc. on the island, but boy, could you start to get afraid of some of these people you're with? He's on to something here. So let's hear from that little one who talked about a beast, and perhaps we can show him how silly he is. The little ones began to jabber among themselves. Then one stood forward. What's your name? Phil. For a little one, he was self-confident, holding out his hands, cradling the conch as Ralph did, looking around them to collect their attention before he spoke. Last night, I had a dream. A horrid dream, fighting with things. I was outside by the shelter by myself, fighting with things, those twisty things in the trees. He paused, and the other little ones laughed in horrified sympathy. Then I was frightened, and I woke up, and I was outside the shelter by myself in the dark, and the twisty things had gone away. The vivid horror of this, so possible and so nakedly terrifying, held them all silent. The child's voice went piping on from behind the white conch. And I was frightened and started to call out for Ralph, and then I saw something moving among the trees, something big and horrid. He paused, half frightened by the recollection, yet proud of the sensation he was creating. That was a nightmare, said Ralph. He was walking in his sleep. The assembly murmured in subdued agreement. The little one shook his head stubbornly. I was asleep when the twisty things were fighting, and when they went away, I was awake, and I saw something big and horrid moving in the trees. Ralph held out his hands for the conch, and the little one sat down. You were asleep. There wasn't anyone there. How could anyone be wandering about in the forest at night? Was anyone? Did anyone go out? There was a long pause while the assembly grinned at the thought of anyone going out in the darkness. Then Simon stood up, and Ralph looked at him in astonishment. You? What were you mucking about in the dark for? Simon grabbed the conch convulsively. I wanted to go to a place I know. What place? Just a place I know, a place in the jungle. He hesitated. Jack settled the question for them with that contempt in his voice that could sound so funny and so final. He was taken short. Okay, you know Simon. You know that he is going into his special place, right? Because it brings him peace and calmness and stuff like that. And none of these other guys know. But this is what the kids are seeing. See, anything like this out of the ordinary creeps them out. That's why Ralph said to talk about it, right? Because if you talk about it, you get it out in the open, you can clear up some of this stuff that they might think is a beast and stuff. But Jack wants none of it. He just wants to tell them they're a bunch of babies and to deal with it, basically, and not discuss it. With a feeling of humiliation on Simon's behalf, Ralph took back the conch, looking Simon sternly in the face as he did so. Well, don't do it again. Understand? Not at night. There's enough silly talk about beasts without little one seeing you gliding about like a... The derisive laughter that rose had fear in it and condemnation. Simon opened his mouth to speak, but Ralph had the conch, so he backed to his seat. When the assembly was silent, Ralph turned to Piggy. Well, Piggy? There's another one. Him. The little ones pushed Percival forward, then left him by himself. He stood knee-deep in the central grass, looking at his hidden feet, trying to pretend he was in a tent. Ralph remembered another small boy who had stood like this, and he flinched away from the memory. It was the boy with the mulberry mark in the beginning, remember? He had pushed the thought down, out of sight, where only some positive reminder like this could bring it back to the surface. There had been no further numberings of the little ones, partly because there was no means of ensuring that all of them were accounted for, and partly because Ralph knew the answer to at least one question Piggy had asked on the mountain top. There were little boys, fair, dark, freckled, and all dirty, but their faces were all dreadfully free of major blemishes. No one had seen the mulberry-colored birthmark again. But that time Piggy had coaxed and bullied, tacitly admitting that he remembered the unmentionable. Ralph nodded to Piggy. Go on, ask him. Piggy knelt, holding the conch. Now then, what's your name? The small boy twisted away into his tent. Piggy turned helplessly to Ralph, who spoke sharply. What's your name? Tormented by the silence and the refusal, the assembly broke into a chant. What's your name? What's your name? Quiet! Ralph peered at the child in the twilight. Now tell us, what's your name? Percival Wemyss Madison, the Vicarage, Harcourt, St. Anthony, Hans telephone, he's trying to, this is how they would respond if you were asked like who you were. You would give them like your bio quickly, basically. I can't remember his telephone number because it's been so long ago. As if this information was rooted far down in the springs of sorrow, the little one wept. His face puckered, the tears leapt from his eyes, his mouth opened till they could see a square black hole. At first he was silent effigy of sorrow, but then the lamentation rose out of him, loud and sustained at the conch. Shut up, you! Shut up! Percival Wemyss Madison would not shut up. A spring had been tapped, far beyond the reach of authority or even physical intimidation. The crying went on, breath after breath, and seemed to sustain him upright as if he were nailed to it. Shut up! Shut up! For now the little ones were no longer silent. They were reminded of their personal sorrows and perhaps felt themselves to share in a sorrow that was universal. They began to cry in sympathy, two of them almost as loud as Percival. Maurice saved them. He cried out, Look at me! He pretended to fall over. He rubbed his rump and sat on the twister so that he fell in the grass. He downed badly, but Percival and the others noticed and sniffed and laughed. Presently, they were all laughing so absurdly that the big uns joined in. So smart Maurice, right? He tries to distract them by being goofy. What's happening here, guys, is the kids are like losing their stuff. Like the crying, they're wailing, they're like hysterical. Finally, like they're letting out some of this fear and stuff through like this sobbing, basically, for some of them. Jack was the first to make himself heard. He had not got the conch and thus spoke against the rules. But nobody minded. And what about the beast? Something strange was happening to Percival. He yawned and staggered so that Jack seized and shook him. Where does the beast live? Percival sagged in Jack's grip. That's a clever beast, said Piggy, jeering, if it can hide on this island. Jack's been everywhere. Where could a beast live? Beast my foot. Percival muttered something and the assembly laughed once again. Ralph leaned forward. What does he say? Jack listened to Percival's answer and then let go of him. Percival, released, surrounded by the comfortable presence of humans, fell in the long grass and went to sleep. Oh my God, poor Percival, he just lost it a little bit, you guys. He kind of like snapped. Jack cleared his throat, then reported casually. He says the beast comes out of the sea. The last laugh died away. Ralph turned involuntarily, a black, humped figure against the lagoon. The assembly looked with him, considered the vast stretches of water, the high sea beyond, unknown indigo of infinite possibility, heard silently the sough and whisper from the reef. Marie spoke, so loudly that they jumped. Daddy said they haven't found all the animals in the sea yet. Argument started again. Ralph held out the glimmering conch and Maurice took it obediently. The meeting subsided. I mean, when Jack says you can be frightened because people are frightened anyway, that's all right. But when he says there's only pigs on this island, I expect he's right. But he doesn't know, not really, not certainly, I mean. Maurice took a breath. My daddy swears there's things, what do you call them, that make ink, squids, that are hundreds of yards long and eat whales whole. He paused again and laughed gaily. I don't believe in the beast, of course, as Piggy says. Life's scientific. But we don't know, do we? Not certainly, I mean. Someone shouted. A squid couldn't come up out of water. Couldn't. In a moment, the platform was full of arguing, gesticulating shadows. To Ralph, seated, this seemed the breaking up of sanity. Fear, beasts, no general agreement that the fire was all important, and no one tried to get the thing straight. The argument sheared off, bringing up fresh, unpleasant matter. He could see a whiteness in the gloom near him, so he grabbed it from Maurice and blew as loudly as he could. The assembly was shocked into silence. Simon was close to him, laying hands on the conch. Simon felt a perilous necessity to speak, but to speak in an assembly was a terrible thing to him. Maybe, he said hesitantly, maybe there is a beast. The assembly cried out savagely, and Ralph stood up in amazement. You, Simon? You believe in this? I don't know, said Simon. His heartbeats were choking him. But the storm broke. Sit down. Shut up. Take the conch. Sod you. Shut up, Ralph shouted. Hear him. He's got the conch. What I mean is, maybe it's only us. Nuts. That was from Piggy, shocked out of decorum. Simon went on. We could be sort of... Simon became inarticulate in his effort to express mankind's essential illness. Inspiration came to him. What's the dirtiest thing there is? As an answer, Jack dropped into the uncomprehending silence that followed it, the one crude, expressive syllable. Release was immense. Those little uns who had climbed back on the twister fell off again and did not mind. The hunters were screaming with delight. Simon's effort fell about him in ruins. The laughter beat him cruelly, and he shrank away defenseless to his seat. At last the assembly was silent again. Someone spoke out of turn. Maybe he means it's some sort of ghost. Ralph lifted the conch and peered into the gloom. The lightest thing was the pale beach. Surely the little ones are nearer. Yes, there was no doubt about it. They were huddled into a tight knot of bodies in the central grass. A flurry of wind made the palms talk, and the noise seemed very loud now that the darkness and silence made it so noticeable. Two gray trunks rubbed each other with an evil speaking that no one had noticed by day. Piggy took the conch out of his hands. We're going to stop here, guys. There's just a couple pages left to finish for this chapter. We'll do in the next video.